you can't have a complete conversation about classic movie monsters without talking about the werewolf. From its inception in the golden age of the universal classic monsters with Werewolf of London and the Wolfman, the modern version of the werewolf is one of the core horror archetypes, and it remains one of the most popular Halloween costumes well into the 21st century. However, in 1980, werewolf movies were considered an old, washed-up cliché, but that was about to change drastically with the release of a film that dared to bring the werewolf into the current day.
Karen White has been brutally assaulted, with her attacker Eddie Quist falling afoul of a policeman's bullet. Unable to cope with the trauma, she and her husband Bill are sent by her psychiatrist to The Colony, a getaway resort by the beach where she can participate in group therapy and make new friends. However, The Colony is not what it seems, and after being attacked by what he thought was a wolf, Bill begins a transformation into something inhuman. Before long, Karen finds herself surrounded by a cult of monstrous shapeshifters, including the resurrected form of Eddie Quist.
In 1977, Gary Bradner published the novel The Howling, a werewolf thriller about a small coven of werewolves living in the woods. Aspiring writer-director Jack Conrad, whose only previous film credits were for the low-budget crime drama Country Blue, and the bizarre X-rated animated film Once Upon a Girl, purchased the rights to the novel from Warner Brothers and wrote a screenplay based on it. Then, with the help of theater owner Stephen Lane, he convinced producers Daniel Blatt and Michael Fennell to take the project to Avco Embassy. Creative differences, however, ultimately caused Conrad to walk away from the project, and the script was reworked by Terrence H. Winkless, though it would ultimately be rewritten from scratch by John Sayles. To replace Jack Conrad as director, Avco head Robert Remy suggested the young, low-budget wunderkind Joe Dante, because the two of them had worked together under Roger Corman at New World Pictures. Dante, who had recently finished Piranha and was working on a doomed Jaws parody, abandoned the latter to make The Howling, and he, along with fellow Corman alumnus John Sayles, who had also written Piranha, reimagined the project from the ground up, largely ignoring the source material in favor of something a little more tongue-in-cheek. To play the lead, Karen White, they cast up-and-comer Dee Wallace, whose breakthrough performance in The Hills Have Eyes made her a bit of a scream queen. She was also something of a method actor, and for many scenes, particularly the one in the adult store, her discomfort is surprisingly real. Based on her performance in The Howling, Steven Spielberg would go on to cast her in E.T. For her character's husband, Bill Neal, Wallace suggested Christopher Stone, an actor known mostly for his television work, without mentioning that he was her fiancé at the time. The two would get married, with Dee Wallace becoming Dee Wallace Stone, and they would appear together once again in Cujo, another movie where Dee Wallace is menaced in a car by a giant canine. The, spoiler alert, central antagonist, the self-help guru Dr. George Wagner, named after the director of The Wolfman, is played by Patrick Macnee, best known as Secret Agent John Steed from The Avengers. Future Golden Raspberry Award-winning director Dennis Dugan plays the reluctant hero Chris Halloran, while Joe Dante regular Belinda Balaski plays his girlfriend Terry. The sultry seductress Marcia Quist is played by former child actress Elizabeth Brooks, while game show host Jim McCrell plays reporter Lou Landers, a character that would reappear in Gremlins. The serial rapist Eddie Quist, meanwhile, is played by Broadway actor Robert Picardo. Picardo was a virtual unknown outside of theater circles at the time, and he got the job because, during his audition with casting director Susan Arnold, daughter of the great Jack Arnold, he creeped her out so much she didn't ever want to work with him, paradoxically making him perfect for the part. Smaller important roles went to Kevin McCarthy, who'd worked with Dante before on Piranha, The legendary character actor John Carradine, who reassured Dante that no matter how the movie turned out, it wouldn't be the worst one he'd ever been in, the A1 steak sauce man James Murtaugh, Dante regular Dick Miller, using the same character name Walter Paisley from A Bucket of Blood, Slim Pickens, and Noble Willingham. Of course, this is a Joe Dante movie, and regular viewers know what that means. It's time to list cameos. There's Kenneth Tobey, who was actually stopped by passers-by who thought he was a real policeman, Roger Corman, in a cameo mimicking William Castle's appearance in Rosemary's Baby, sci-fi writer and publisher Forrest J. Ackerman, seen holding copies of his magazine Famous Monsters of Filmland, a portrait of the Wolfman himself, Lon Chaney Jr., and writer John Sayles, taking cues from the real mortician in the room. This real-life morgue within the City of Hope Hospital in Duarte is one of many real California locations used throughout the film. There were a few studio sets, but most of the movie was filmed on location. The TV station scenes were filmed at Channel 58 in Huntington Beach, and the Smut Row scenes were filmed on Western Avenue in Hollywood, with the adult store being a real X-rated shop, though the interior of the viewing booth is a set, and the explicit movie I obviously can't show here is fake. The outdoor scenes were mostly done in Mendocino, specifically around Russian Gulch and the Mendocino Woodlands campgrounds, and in Griffith Park, with this sequence filmed at Paradise Cove and Leo Carrillo Beach in Malibu. These scenes were filmed at the Vermont tennis courts off Hollywood Boulevard, and the occult bookstore was the Cherokee Bookstore. Filming took place in a whirlwind 28 days in mid-1980, with a budget so low that many of the cast members were forced to wear their own clothing for much of the shoot. It was always intended to use practical effects rather than camera tricks to film the werewolf scenes, but there were problems that made them look less than stellar. As a result, the filmmakers had to get more funding, which they did from Westcom Productions, in order to replace a bulky suit that looked more like a bear than a wolf, and film some long shots along with the show-stopping Eddie transformation. There was also some stop-motion work done by animator David Allen, though nearly all of it was removed from the final cut for looking wildly out of place. And there was also one bit of cell animation that is notably terrible. Initially, the makeup and other creature effects were to be done by Rick Baker, who left halfway through production in order to work on An American Werewolf in London. However, he left in charge a 21-year-old Rob Bottin, a veteran of Piranha, who was more than up to the task and who kinda looked like a werewolf himself at the time. With the help of a marketing campaign that kept most of the movie a secret, selling it more as a crime thriller than a werewolf movie, The Howling released in March of 1981 to relatively good reviews for a horror flick and a total domestic box office run of $17.9 million against its budget of between $1.1 and $1.7 million. It got the attention of Steven Spielberg, who gave Joe Dante and producer Michael Fennell the opportunity to make Gremlins in its wake, and it was the starting point for a new era in werewolf cinema, with Wolfen and An American Werewolf in London releasing in the following months to similar success. It started an arms race throughout the 80s of more and more werewolf movies and on-screen werewolf transformations in everything from Fright Night to Teen Wolf, and it spawned a frankly absurd number of sequels, along with stubborn rumors of a full-on remake, with its Andy Muschietti purported to direct. I'll admit, I didn't see it myself until well after I'd seen all the 80s werewolf movies that followed it, probably because of its definitively harder R rating. So when I finally did get around to The Howling, I wasn't as impressed as I would have been had I never seen a werewolf transformation that wasn't a dissolve. However, I did key in on its unique tone, one that is absolutely intended to scare you, but which is offset by tongue-in-cheek, self-referential humor. It's clearly a Joe Dante picture, even if it isn't as cartoonish as Gremlins, Explorers, or Inner Space, and its seedier, more salacious aspects only serve to highlight its aspirations to be just a couple of steps above cheap exploitation. those aspects also fit into the film's adult themes. Granted, they're not as explicit in the film as they are in the novel, but they are still there. Bradner's book is about whether a marriage can survive unspeakable trauma, and though you could still find that in the film version if you dig deep enough, screenwriter John Sayles was more interested in lampooning the self-help craze of the time period and dealing with a more academic psychological take on the werewolf where it represents the unconscious id. I will say the film's story is better than the novel's, but the writer in me does get a little annoyed by the glossed-over coincidences that the film introduces by changing up the characters and their relationships. For example, there's the unexplained fact that Karen is being stalked by a werewolf who happens to be living at the colony run by Karen's own psychologist. Despite these nitpicks, I have come to love and appreciate The Howling upon repeat viewings, and I do consider it one of the better werewolf movies out there, even if it doesn't crack my top 3. I do feel like it could be scarier, although I guess it would have scared the crap out of me had I seen it as a kid, but I love Dante's perspective that a little bit of humor is necessary to take the horror seriously, because in his own words, if you don't give the audience something to laugh at, they'll find it in something you don't intend to be funny. As I said, this is more serious than most of Dante's works, but there is plenty of humor sprinkled throughout, with my personal favorite being the many references to wolves hidden in plain sight. All in all, if you're looking for a classic 80s werewolf movie with great practical effects, a deep story, a little humor, and more nudity than you probably expect, you can't do much better than The Howling. And that's all for today, my dear mortals. What's your favorite 80s werewolf movie? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons while you're down there. Thank you for watching, and until next time when we'll visit a house built by a castle, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not in a werewolf cult.